and welcome to another edition of Mega MNC on ET Now. I'm Anisha Jain. Well, the company that we are featuring today is the epitome of Mega MNC, and that's because this company managed to see the potential of India very, very early on. In fact, as early as 1867, and since then has been participating in India's growth journey through its presence in industrials, automation, digitization, amongst a lot more. And steering it in India is Mr. Sunil Mathur, the CEO at Siemens India. Thank you, Sunil, for having us here in your factory.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for visiting us.
Thank you so much. It seems like a mega factory, and I want to learn a lot more from you about it. But before that, you've been associated with Siemens for what? Like a little over 2 decades already?
That's right. I don't like to say it, but it's been a long time. That's right.
But you know, the reason why I brought it on was not to kind of talk about the age or the wisdom, but given the fact you've been watching India's development at very, very close quarters for the last many years. And we are, speaking at the time when G20 is happening. India is literally at the center stage of the entire world. In your conversations with your peers across the world and your clients, what's been the chatter and perspective of India right now?
I think India is definitely center stage today. And center stage for more reasons than one. I mean, the G20 is a brilliant example of that. But also the performance. And finally, that is what counts. Especially for companies, what is really critical is the fact that we have actually performed in the last 4 or 5 years. And we have delivered on this tremendous opportunity that we have here in the country. And I think that is what has brought the focus of the world directly onto India.
I'm sure you thrive under pressure, but there's this pressure of increasing the overall manufacturing push as well. And this is something which the government has been talking about a lot more. There are a lot of PLI schemes that have come out. There's a lot of policy initiative around it. The last couple of years, the large part of India's development was on account of services. Do you think right now manufacturing is at an inflection point?
Most definitely. And I think this was articulated by the Honorable Prime Minister a couple of years ago when he said, he's looking at inclusive growth. And for inclusive growth, manufacturing is going to be critical. Now, his vision was to increase or is to increase the share of manufacturing, the GDP, from 15% of GDP to 25% of GDP. Now, that's a huge vision. And that means roughly $1.5 trillion of Capex will need to come into the country over the next couple of years. Now, that's a vision. But then it has been backed up by concrete action in terms of the PLI scheme, in terms of companies actually coming in and setting up manufacturing here. And we are beginning to see that. There's a lot of interest in manufacturing, a lot of fresh capacities coming up. Companies are looking at diversification. India is definitely a good place to be in. And we see things happening. We see real traction on the ground. So I believe it's not just a vision. That vision is slowly getting realized. And that's what makes it so exciting.
It is exciting indeed. But this is the point I want to scratch further with you. Right now, we are witnessing a very, very broad-based Capex cycle. We used to talk about the green shoots for the longest time, but those green shoots are finally materializing. But the question is, where are we in this cycle? Because it's already been 2 to 3 years that the Capex has been on an uptrend. Do you see this cycle lasting for long more? Or do you think we've peaked?
No, I don't think we peaked at all. I think when you look at Capex, particularly in infrastructure will go on for the next couple of years. India needs the infrastructure. We are looking at roads, we are looking at railways, we are looking at highways, we are looking at ports, at airports, metros in every city. There's such a huge potential in this country. So I believe this kind of Capex in infrastructure is absolutely fundamental for the country to grow. Unless you have the right infrastructure, company manufacturing becomes difficult. You need electricity, you need water, you need logistics. And again I think this is where this entire vision has been so cohesive. We've been talking about not only bringing in manufacturing, but manufacturing will not happen without logistics.
Correct.
And the government has turned around and said we want to reduce logistic costs from 13% of GDP down to 9%. a huge reduction. And they backed it up with highways coming in, with the new free passes on the toll roads and all that, speeding things up. The railways is doing an amazing job on freight there. So I think a lot of these actions are now coming together into a cohesive implementation plan.
Just wanted to shift the focus back a bit on exports because that's again an important area, and the talk is about making in India the export hub as well. What is Siemens doing for that? What percentage of, let's say, the revenue right now comes from exports? What can it go up to?
Well, 20% of our business is already being exported. We are a part of the global network of manufacturing. We have 31 factories in the country, and we are exporting from most of them into Siemens countries around the world. And I think the potential to expand this is huge. Digitalization is going to be the differentiator. I keep coming back to that because earlier on, we always said in India, we have cheap labor.
Correct.
And labor arbitrage is what makes us competitive. With digitalization, labor arbitrage makes no difference anymore. You can get efficiencies of 99.9%, right? In India, we have efficiencies average of about 75, 77%. So the only way you can actually grow and become competitive for exports is through digitalization. And I think that's why India is a natural alternative. We can adopt the digitalization, we will adopt it, and exports will be the natural consequence for that.
But coming back to India and the infrastructure bit that you were talking about, railways is one thing which is seeing a massive amount of capex right now. See, you also back that big order as far as the railways is concerned, almost a 26,000 crore order.
That's right.
Coming in on the 9,000 HP locomotives. Do you see this momentum continuing? What's the order visibility like for mobility and railways?
Oh, absolutely. I think the railways has got a very structured plan. The Honorable Minister for Railways knows exactly what needs to be done. He has a background in the railways as well, and therefore he's able to articulate the vision into clear implementation. And I think he's working on it in a very structured manner. They're looking at electrification. And let me just give you an example of this. India has electrified close to 60,000 kilometers of railways. In the last 7 years, they've electrified over 30,000 kilometers of railways. That's not a small number. 32,000 is the size of the entire railway electrification network in Germany, right? India has managed to do that in 7 years, right? So that is the focus, not only from the perspective that it's the right thing to do, but from an environmental perspective, it is the right thing to do. Signaling is another area. Very clear program of what needs to be done on the signaling side. Rolling stock, and this is the order that we got. He knows precisely what kind of rolling stock is required, and you see this in the Vande Bharat trains, in the Vande Metro trains, in the locomotives, etc. There is a clear strategy in place, and that strategy is now visible to us, and that strategy is being implemented. And this is the difference. For the first time, we are seeing the railways having a strategy and actually implementing it.
True that. So I'm guessing that is one of the growth drivers for you going forward as well. But you have any type of visibility in terms of what the order inflow potential can be for railways? Because as you said, a lot has been talked about, and yes, it's getting implemented as well. But any opportunity size or where we are in that cycle, what kind of uptick we can expect?
Well, I can't give you a number, but I can tell you on electrification, we still have a way to go. On signaling, there is a way to go. There's a huge
what, we are
potential.
halfway through or even less than halfway?
I think on electrification, we are more than halfway through. We are close to completion. But on signaling, we need to accelerate that. On rolling stock, there's a huge potential. Yeah, all the trains, all the metros, all the locomotives
And
need
now
to be
the new Vande
upgraded.
Bharats, which
The
are
new
coming
Vande
up.
Bharat series over there. So I think we are looking at a Capex cycle of at least another 5 to 7 years there.
Wow, so 5 to 7 years, the railway capex is going to be quite strong. But, there was another order that was going to open in August itself. I think 12,000 SP. Has that worked out?
That is in the pipeline.
Okay.
And we'll see where that lands up.
But are you confident of maintaining the margins? Because, of course, with an order of that size, I'm sure the competition is also quite a bit, even from the global players. Are you confident that this would be accretive in terms of pricing and the margin?
We have to be. To be competitive in India, the margins have got to stack up. The price has to stack up. And everything in between is cost management. And that's our challenge.
Of course, you have to manage the costs and all of that. But now, are clients putting pressure to kind of pass on the price benefits of the raw material?
Most definitely. I wouldn't expect anything else.
So is that a lot of pressure right now, the renegotiations, etc.?
We've lived under pressure for 157 years.
So you have been talking about how clients always put pressure on the margins, but I'm sure the clients are talking a lot about capex and capacity expansion, given the utilizations, as you talked about, is high. But which are those industries? Is it happening across the board? Is it more traditional industries, new age tech?
I think where we are definitely seeing expansion is in areas like e-vehicles, data centers, semiconductor, fuel cells, etc. Those kind of areas where there is real traction. Data centers, e-vehicles, a lot of interest, a lot of expansion happening there. But also, I think in the traditional areas, it's more brownfield, so it's more expanding capacities. What is great is that we are now, as a country, up to around 75, 76% capacity utilizations. And that is terrific, because this is the time when businesses start looking at the runway ahead and saying, now is the time to start either expanding sideways or expanding forward. And this is now the time when you talked about Capex cycle. We were getting up to a level up to now, and now it's a question of taking off. And I see right now the opportunity for us as a country to start really taking us to the next level in terms of expanding brownfield as well as greenfield.
Okay, so that actually answers my next question, because I was going to ask you, is it plateauing a bit or are we taking off? But you answered that we are taking off, and this is the sweet spot for you as well, right? When the utilization is high, that is when all these discussions start. But the other thing, you talked about EV, and you yourself are dabbling into it, right? You recently made an acquisition. What's the plan with respect to the EV infrastructure then?
I think EV infrastructure is going to boom here in the country. Yeah, we've just started. Again, over here, there are not only plans in place, but there are clear implementation strategies happening. And the PLI is one of them, and so on. And I think we are part of that. We want to be a part of that. The acquisition that we did is helping us to get into that area. Charging infrastructure will be critical. So you have the vehicles, e-vehicles, but they need to be charged, and they need to have the access to charging stations all over the country. And I think this is really at an inflection point where we see so much interest around the country, many new players coming on the scene, and we're talking and partnering with many of them.
Okay, that's great to hear. But you made another decision along with this EV acquisition, and that was about the transfer of the LV motor business, right? The shareholders for now have shot it down, but what's the way forward? What are you thinking about it now?
So I think the shareholders have decided. The board will now consider it, and we will see where it goes from here.
But what are the options on the table? Are you looking at completely stopping that sale, or are you looking at maybe increasing the price?
Well, I think, look, we made it clear also to the shareholders up front that the price is what it is. We also said the business is primarily commoditized. We also believe we don't have the IP rights. Siemens Germany is selling it or intends to sell it at some point in time. And that was the reason why we said, let's do it now before we get into a situation where we may not have too many options on the table. The shareholders have decided, and we will have to wait and see now how the environment develops globally as well as here. And then we'll go back to the board with some ideas and see what the board says.
So, okay, so you have a difficult job at that, but sorry to pry a bit on this. Any timeline on that clarity, A? And secondly, are there other such businesses that you do not see much value being added from, let's say, Siemens India, and which would be a better fit maybe for the parent or just to sell it off?
So we don't have a timeline for the low voltage motors business. We now accept the decision that the shareholders have taken, and we will review the options at the right time.
Okay.
For the rest of the business that you talked about, look, we continuously evaluate our businesses in terms of the market environment, in terms of the profitability, in terms of the growth possibilities. And I think the important factor for any company is to continue to evolve. And this is part of it, right? We can't ignore the environment around us, which is changing at a much faster pace today than it was 20 years ago. And we have to be ahead of that curve. Otherwise, we run the danger of being left behind. And that's our continuous endeavor. So I will never say never, but it's a part of running normal businesses to see how we can make them grow and grow profitably.
You know what? You're baiting me with the next question. As to there seems to be some thought process around some of the verticals that you might be looking at probably demerging or selling off. Anything that you can share with us at this point of time?
No.
Sure. Nonetheless, you know what? We'll take a breather on that note. Don't go anywhere. When we come back, we'll talk about the rest of the business because, of course, energy solution is one part which is seeing a lot of investment as well. We'll decode that on the other side.